Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Grand Rounds. We have Janet Pace presenting. I'll just do a little introduction for her. Janet Pace is a clinical director at Faces of Hope, a victim service agency in Boise. She became a social worker in 2010 and started off her career working in behavioral support in the elementary school setting. She then became a trained forensic interviewer with a children's advocacy center, where she interviewed hundreds of children for law enforcement and CPS when there were allegations of abuse or exposure to violence. Her most recent career as a crisis counselor has been the most rewarding, as it has enabled her to soften the landing for individuals who have experienced interpersonal violence. She has a strong interest in the impact of trauma on the brain and nervous system, and is particularly interested in the shared nervous system traits of autistic individuals and those who have trauma symptoms. So thank you very much for joining us, and go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you for the introduction. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, thumbs up? Okay, cool. So thank you for inviting me to speak today. This is a subject that I get very excited about, and it's something that has helped me be more effective as a crisis counselor and more effective in working with people who've gone through something traumatic. Emotional regulation and its relationship to our senses and to the vagus nerve is a topic that is really flourishing right now. There's some amazing resources and research coming out, and it's good timing because, you know, there's many people struggling with mental health, and I think we need all the tools and strategies we can get right now to help each other out. So I hope that by focusing on this topic today, it will be helpful for all of you, no matter what capacity you work in or plan to be working in. I think this is something we could use for ourselves as well as the people that we are going to be working with. So let me start by sharing some of the objectives. We're going to take a look at some of the shared characteristics between trauma symptoms and common challenges around autism, and discuss those topics through the lens of polyvagal theory. And then we will take a quick tour and review the 8 senses and differentiate between sensory seeking behaviors and sensory avoiding behaviors, and then the consequences of being overstimulated or understimulated. And then we will take a closer look at some sensory-based strategies and polyvagal exercises that can be used to improve emotional regulation. So first of all, I will start by describing where I work and what I do. I am the clinical director at Faces of Hope. I work with a counseling team of 5. And Faces of Hope is here in Boise, and we are a victim service agency that helps those impacted by domestic and sexual assault, child abuse, elder abuse, stalking, and human trafficking. And we have services within our foundation and within our agency, but we also operate collaboratively with many private and public partners to deliver stabilizing crisis intervention services in a safe, private and supportive setting. So within our team, we offer things like advocacy and safety planning, help with protection orders, case management, crisis counseling, emergency assistance. Then we also have some support groups and classes as well. And we are funded through government grants and private fundraisers and donations. So all of our services are free of charge for people who meet the criteria of our mission. And since our services are free, we don't bill any insurance. Therefore, we don't go through any official diagnostic process with our clients. But if we did, we would most likely be dealing with a lot of the diagnoses that fall under trauma and stressor related disorders in the DSM. So as a whole, our goal at Faces of Hope is to help clients achieve stabilization and regulation by helping to relieve some of the impact of their experiences involving interpersonal violence. For instance, I might be helping a client with crisis counseling, but they'll also be meeting with a case manager to help with things like housing and other needed resources. And then they might also be meeting with our attorney for some guidance with civil or criminal matters. And then they might also pop in for an empowerment class on Wednesday nights and learn more about abuse dynamics and what a healthy relationship looks like. And what we find is that when all of these services are combined together, victims of these types of crimes tend to come out the other side a lot faster and a lot stronger than with just one of these services alone. But due to the amount of people needing these types of services, we have to keep our counseling to a minimum. It's short term. It's usually like 4 to 6 sessions, sometimes more, sometimes less. And then for those who need some long-term support and therapy, we make sure to refer them to places that that can continue and try to provide that warm handoff. So right now, our counseling team focuses a lot on using trauma-focused CBT because we work with a lot of kids who've been exposed to violence or experienced direct abuse themselves. We do a lot of EMDR. We use strategies like internal family systems, some inner child work. But no matter what we do, it's pretty much all through the lens of polyvagal theory. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with polyvagal theory. I will go over it here in a little bit if you're not. So prior to becoming a crisis counselor, I was a forensic interviewer. And I'd like to explain this role and why it helped me understand the profound significance of the concept of emotional safety or emotional regulation. You'll hear me refer to it in different terms, but we'll start there. A forensic interview is a neutral, fact-finding conversation, usually with teens or kids. Sometimes I would interview adults with disabilities. And that's when you want to get an accurate account of events when there's been allegations of abuse or some exposure to violence of some kind. And interviewers go through a lot of training and adhere to some very specific protocols. And these protocols are legally sound, they are evidence-based, they are trauma-informed, and developmentally flexible. So I could interview people of all ages and all abilities by tweaking different things. And forensic interviewers usually work for or do interview. All forensic interviews should be done at a place called a Children's Advocacy Center. There is a lot of safeguards and protocols in place to make sure it's all very legally sound, so that these interviews can be admitted as evidence if needed. And as you can imagine, most kids do not want to talk about these things. They do not freely open up and discuss the details about their abusive experience unless they feel a certain degree of emotional safety. Their abuse experiences, especially, unfortunately, in sexual abuse, which is quite frequent, these are the last things these kids want to talk about, and you can't blame them. They're usually burdened with a great deal of shame and embarrassment, and their sense of safety has been violated and taken away from them. So unfortunately, also due to being raised in certain situations, some kids have never known what it's like to feel that sense of emotional safety. And most child abuse victims are abused by people they care about very much and trust. And the last thing they want to do is get that person in trouble or get blamed for what happened or feel like they are responsible for their family getting torn apart. But in order for that abuse to stop and for offenders to be held accountable, law enforcement and CPS needs the details of their abuse. And those specific details, along with other important elements of an investigation, help law enforcement determine if there's been a crime, and if so, which charges will be pursued. So there's a lot that rides on the results of a high quality forensic interview. And for me, interviewing felt like kind of an art and a science. It was a delicate dance where you're not only following this scripted protocol, but you're also paying attention and reading body cues, body language, facial expressions, tone of voice, signs of hyperarousal and hypoarousal. And it's challenging because from a very young age, we are taught to mask a lot of these things. So I quickly learned, the more I did, the more I learned how to help kids and teens feel that sense of emotional safety and help them get as regulated as possible. Because when they're in that state, that gives them the best opportunity to be able to describe in detail what happened to them without having them feel re-traumatized. But I mean, how do you do that when to this child, you're a stranger to them and you're in this strange room and they usually know that they're being recorded and that someone is watching or listening from a different room? It's a process that sounds absolutely daunting, and it is certainly a lot to ask of kids. So I began to play around with some different strategies and try a few things. For instance, I would always dim the lights and turn on some lamps. I would always offer the families, or our staff would offer families like a warm drink upon their arrival. I'd be really cautious during the interview, making sure I didn't make too much eye contact with these kids. And we used a lot of parallel play. So for instance, we'd play with Play-Doh while we're talking, or we'd color or doodle. And that way I'm not looking directly at them, but we can talk with each other. I also allowed a lot of time for rapport building so I could get to know them, and they knew that I did have a genuine interest in what their lives are like. I would also pay attention to the pace of the conversation, how fast I would talk, and I would just try to match what felt comfortable for them and make sure to avoid any overstimulation of any kind, including things like smells, like heating up your lunch, or any kind of candle or scent. Some people are very overstimulated by those things. And so I would always make sure that there was nothing that could be perceived as, something overstimulating. And many of the kids that I interviewed, I'm sorry, I skipped a slide there. Many of the kids that I interviewed often had disabilities of some kind or another. In fact, children with disabilities are at least 3 times more likely to be abused or neglected than their peers without disabilities. And there's many variables that can affect this dynamic. But for instance, a few of them, depending on their disability, they may not be able to protect themselves in any way. They may be more reliant on the perpetrator for their care. And also, depending on the type of disability, some kids are just more vulnerable, and perpetrators will look for that vulnerability to exploit. Also, a significant amount of kids that I interviewed had autism and sensory difficulties. So as I was learning about the best way to interview kids with disabilities, I started to hear more and more about something called polyvagal theory. And that describes how the autonomic nervous system responds during times of stress or perceived threat. And for me, this theory confirmed that what I was noticing about how a child's ability to discuss the details of their abuse was somehow related to their sense of safety. And that knowledge was extraordinarily helpful for me in my job in general, but especially when helping kids on the autism spectrum. So I now see both trauma symptoms and autism-related traits and challenges through that polyvagal lens, which has made crisis counseling for me much more efficient and effective and very rewarding. So polyvagal theory in a nutshell is taking a look at the vagus nerve, this amazing and very complex cranial nerve that wanders throughout the body, sending out sensory fibers from the brainstem to the visceral organs. Dr. Stephen Porges, the creator of polyvagal theory, described it as a theory that links the evolution of the mammalian autonomic nervous system to social behavior and emphasizes the importance of the physiological state in the expression of behavioral problems and psychiatric disorders. That is an awful lot of big words for me. So luckily, there are a lot of people like Deb Dana, who is a clinician and author who writes amazing books that translate the science of polyvagal theory into clinical application. And there's many other authors who do this as well. But she is my go-to interpreter for this theory and how I can use it in what I do. So there's many important terms when you're discussing polyvagal theory, but the three that I want to point out are co-regulation, neuroception, and the autonomic hierarchy. And just to review this, co-regulation is how we connect with others to create a shared sense of safety. That's what I was doing when I was interviewing kids. I was trying to co-regulate with them. It is considered a biological imperative because it's how we attach to our caregivers as an infant. As far as the nervous system is concerned, co-regulation equals safety. And when I'm sitting down with my clients, I want my nervous system state to be strong enough to hold myself and the client that I'm with. Deb Dana says our autonomic nervous system longs for connection with another system and sends signals out into the world, searching for signals in return. And the nervous system does this through the process of neuroception, which is described as this unconscious surveillance system, or like the security gate in an airport, that helps determine whether or not a situation or a person is safe, or if they're dangerous, or if there's something life-threatening going on. Our nervous systems, in an effort to keep us out of trouble, are unconsciously inspecting our environments and the people around us for what they call cues of safety or cues of danger, or cues of threat. In people, these cues are picked up through things like the intonation of a person's voice, their gestures, their body language, their facial expression, their eyes, and just the emotional climate. And if you practice it, you can become more conscious of your own neuroception. It speaks to us through body sensations and emotions, which we'll get to, but those are critical things to learn about. So take, for instance, these phrases. I'm sure all of you have heard these many times. Things like, I have butterflies in my stomach, which truly I do right now because I'm not used to giving presentations. Or the phrase, something tells me I was being lied to. Or I had a hunch that something wasn't right. Something just wasn't right. Or that gave me goosebumps. Or I trusted my gut. This is the language of neuroception. These phrases are a good example of neuroception in action. We pick up these tiny little microscopic cues from other people and from our environments that tell us if we're safe or not. And if you stop and take notice of the effects of these feelings, you can begin to influence your own nervous system and shape the different areas that we'll talk about next. if I'm at work and I hear somebody yelling down the hall, my nervous system in a fraction of a second picks up cues of danger, and my body responds accordingly in an effort to keep me safe. This is a primitive evolutionary action that it is designed to keep us safe. And so then if I'm aware of it consciously, I can take steps to reassure myself and calm myself back down. But most of us live our whole lives without even knowing that this is even happening. And then the other important term, we've got co-regulation, we've got neuroception, and we've also got the autonomic hierarchy, which includes the sympathetic nervous system, the dorsal vagal system, and then lastly, the ventral vagal system. I've got this out of order on the slides, but the dorsal vagal system, which is like the system of shutdown, is where we literally shut down and freeze in order to deal with threat. And from an evolutionary perspective, this was the first part of the nervous system to evolve. And then the next part was the sympathetic system, which is the fight or flight that we hear about. This is the system of action, which mobilizes our bodies to either run away or fight during threat. And then lastly, there is the ventral vagal system, which is the system of connection that keeps us in the here and the now. And that's precisely where I want to be and where I want my clients to be. That's where I am leading them to, is their own ventral vagal center. And most of our traumatized clients are either stuck in sympathetic or dorsal or both. Go to the next slide here. Being the visual person that I am, I like to explain this to my clients using this handout, which you can get online. And it breaks the autonomic nervous system into 3 sections here. You've got the red, sympathetic hyperarousal, blue is the dorsal vagal, the hypoarousal, and then in the middle is ventral vagal. That's our what Dan Siegel referred to as our window of tolerance. The sympathetic system goes by a couple different terms and words. So when we're saying that we're mobilized or hyper-aroused, or if somebody needs to move in this direction, we say upregulate. So these are some of the terms you'll hear around hyperarousal and sympathetic. The fighting instinct is when, you'll know that clients are there because they start to feel frustrated and irritated, and then they might get angry, and that can turn into rage. And so during times of threat, energy goes where it's not needed, like digestion or immune response or insulin activity, and it goes into the parts of the body that need it, usually like the facial area, the arms, and there's an increase in cortisol, so we can become mobilized. This is where you hear people say, bring it on, And then in the flight category, you'll notice symptoms of just this chronic worry that turns into anxiety. There's a lot of avoidance behaviors, fear, and panic. And again, the energy is being rerouted from those non-essential tasks and being supplied to like our legs so that we can book it away from a predator if we have to. Physiologically, when a person is in sympathetic, there's that release of cortisol and adrenaline causing muscle activation, increased alertness, sharpened senses, increased blood pressure, heart rate, fuel availability, oxygen, increase in circulation to the vital organs, and just whatever, anything and everything that helps with a defensive response. Oftentimes people who are in the sympathetic state see danger everywhere, and they might hyper-focus on all the things that could go wrong. What if this happens? What if that happens? They might also become defensive really easily and read into other people's facial expressions and voice tones. And they begin to see the worst in other people over time. And these people are, when we're in this state, we're more likely to jump to inaccurate conclusions. And, you know, in some cases, it can be interpreted as this person seems paranoid. It seems like they think that everybody's out to get them. And that's the results of being stuck up there in hyperarousal. Dorsal vagal, on the other hand, this is the freeze response. This also, we hear the word fawn down here too. This is where we're conserving energy. There's a collapse, a kind of surrender. When someone is in the dorsal dumps, as we say, their nervous system is considered hypoaroused. There is this immobilization that appears as a freeze response. And if somebody needs to come down from hyperarousal and use more hypoarousal energy, we say they are downregulating. So oftentimes I will hear my clients who've been sexually assaulted be really hard on themselves and say things like, why, I just don't understand why I didn't fight back. I don't understand why I didn't scream. It was like I was frozen. That's because they were in the hypoarousal dorsal vagal state. Their body made a determination that in order for me to stay safe, I have to freeze right now. There was no conscious choice. You didn't have the ability to scream out for help. It's just something the body does in certain circumstances. So when we're in the freeze response, people might experience things like spacing out, dissociation, numbness, depression, shame, isolation, and forgetfulness. People will say things like, I'm not really here, I'm just going through the motions, or I feel trapped. And then fawning is another symptom in dorsal vagal where the person appears to have a lot of codependent behaviors and people pleasing, avoiding eye contact, putting other people's needs before their own, difficulty saying no, and setting boundaries, which is a struggle for a lot of people. But if you're raised in an environment where there's a lot of abuse or chaos, sometimes that fawning response is what you learn to survive your circumstances, and it just becomes the way that you operate in the world. So some physiological symptoms of being in dorsal vagal include fatigue, exhaustion, feeling numb. There's a decreased heart rate, decreased blood pressure, temperature, muscle tone, facial expression, and a flattened affect. There's often disorientation and a decrease in the depth of the breath. You're just barely breathing and the heart is beating very slowly. There's also a decrease in social behavior. We kind of numb out. We don't want to connect with anybody. And that can have an effect on our immune response. And overall, there's just this conservation of metabolic resources. So when people get stuck in either dorsal vagal or sympathetic, we hear things like complaints about sleep issues, appetite issues, not being able to concentrate, headaches, body aches, chronic sickness, and a lot of gut issues. But then there's this wonderful place in between, the window of tolerance. In this diagram on this slide, it's shown in this white window. So window of tolerance is a term that was created by Dr. Dan Siegel in 99. He described it as the optimal zone of arousal. And this is when our nervous system is in that ventral vagal state. It's really the sweet spot and what this whole presentation is about. We have a sense of control. We feel safe and organized. We can easily meet the challenges of the day with ease. And one of the reasons this window of tolerance is so great is because it gives us easy access to using our prefrontal cortex. And that, of course, is allowing us the ability to be aware and think critically. Reasoning, decision-making, planning come easy. We can be creative and artistic. We can focus and analyze. There's just multiple bells and whistles that come with that prefrontal cortex when it's allowed to do its job. And so being in the window of tolerance gives people the opportunity to do those things. If I'm in my window of tolerance, here's some things you might notice about me. I'll be more lighthearted. I'll smile easily, and my sense of humor will be really good. There might be a sparkle in my eyes, and I'll just be chill as can be. Like problems kind of slide off my back. I might feel braver, and I may want to venture out into the world. I might be more curious and reflective and, take some time to reflect and do some meaning making. I might have some moments of worry or frustration, but if I do, I pull back quickly. I can bounce back really easily. I'll have this sense of flexibility, and it kind of reminds me of a palm tree. And the wind is the stress, but the wind doesn't break us. We just kind of bend to it. And that's what it's like. That's what I think of when I think of being in that window of tolerance. And also, we're more resistant to illness. So if I do get sick or I do get injured, I'm able to repair and recuperate quickly. Good circulation to my skin and extremities, not just my vital organs, and access to oxytocin, which makes it easier for me to socially bond and connect with others. And I'm less defensive. I don't see everything as a threat, and there's more prosody in my voice. So lots and lots of benefits to being in ventral vagal or the window of tolerance. And I put together this slide to kind of give you the idea of what it is like to be in ventral vagal and feel really strongly anchored there. I take part in more of my hobbies and interests, and there's just more quality to living when you're in that state. So it's critical that we know how to get there and how to help other people get there too. Oftentimes when I'm with my clients, I will hand them this copy of this handout, and it lists all the different trauma symptoms. And I'll ask them which ones they've been experiencing. And most of my clients, after having some kind of interpersonal violence, will tell me that they're experiencing most of these to some degree or another. These are the things that happen to the human body when we get stuck in preparing for threat and danger. But if we look, we can easily identify which of these symptoms is hyperarousal. For instance, anxiety, panic attack, hypervigilance, startle response. Those are things you see from the sympathetic part. And then the hypoarousal symptoms are things like numbing and dissociating, depression, and just that freeze response where you're immobilized. And then some of the other symptoms, like let's say substance abuse, eating disorders, self-destructive behaviors, sometimes these are attempts to get ourselves to feeling normal again, but they end up being more destructive and harmful. So, as I said earlier, I would frequently interview kids on the autism spectrum, and I would notice a lot of these similarities. And Dr. Porges said that many of the symptoms that we've learned to think of as diagnostic criteria for autism spectrum disorder are really emergent properties of a physiology that is in a state of threat. And it's an interesting way to look at it. And when you look at some of the symptoms and characteristics of autism, you'll notice some chronic anxiety, difficulty feeling safe around others, a lack of eye contact, because eye contact can be absolutely overwhelming when you have autism. There's often a need for sameness, because sameness means predictability, and predictability means safety. They might use objects or toys to self-regulate because, again, you can predict things better than you can with people. There might be difficulties with behavioral state regulation because there's a very narrow window of tolerance. You might see a lot of withdrawal and dissociation because this world is very overstimulating for a lot of people on the spectrum. And GI issues, that comes with being dysregulated. You also might see some stimming, some self-stimulating behaviors like flapping or even nail biting. I've heard can be a kind of a stimming behavior because you're trying to feel regulated. But what's most interesting to me is the atypical processing of all these 8 senses. When you're not processing things correctly, that incoming stimulation can be absolutely overwhelming. And I think it's why we see a lot of meltdowns. So just like with trauma victims, those with autism often need these anchors of stability and predictability in order to return to their ventral vagal states. They need to know what to expect, and they don't like surprises. And so there's actually a lot, you can see a lot of similarities between these autism characteristics and the trauma symptoms that we talked about. Now, luckily, oftentimes when autism affects a child's ability to learn in school and function efficiently, they might get referred to an occupational therapist who specializes in helping people recover and learn skills and overcome challenges and live more independently. Occupational therapists are great at helping those who have certain illnesses, injuries, disabilities, and other challenges. And one of the things that OTs provide is sensory integration therapy for those with sensory challenges. And I'm definitely not an occupational therapist, but I've learned some great things from people who are about our sensory system. So thinking about the 5 senses of touch, sight, smell, taste, and sound, a lot of people get overwhelmed with touch or different fabric textures, different, like some kids don't like to wear denim. They may get overstimulated when they're messy, or if they're in too close of proximity to another, that feels very threatening. And then with sight, too much stimulus can get overwhelming. There may be pickiness with smell and taste. The taste of some things or the smell of some things or the texture of some things might just feel just really icky and threatening. And then sound is a really big one. I'll read to you here what Dr. Porges said in his neuroscience of safety course. He said that there is a retuning of how the middle ear structures are working when our body is under a state of threat. Predator sounds are permeated through the middle ear and brain, which dampens the frequency band of the human voice where social communication occurs. And a lot of times you'll see, like in a restaurant where there's background music, it is really, really difficult to process what another person is saying because it becomes impossible to filter that out. And so occupational therapists are really good about providing environmental adaptations so that the world and the sensory data is less threatening. But they also teach you a lot about other senses that you forget about or maybe haven't heard about, and that's proprioception, the awareness that we have of how our body is positioned in space, our vestibular system, which is the sense of balance, gravity, and movement, kind of related to how the inner ear communicates with the brain. And then interoception, which is an understanding and awareness of internal body signals and feeling pain or pressure inside the body, maybe feeling your heartbeat, feeling that your bladder is full. Kids with these difficulties may not know if they've eaten too much or if they have to go to the bathroom, or there might be an abnormal response to pain and pressure. So a lot of kids that OTs work with have difficulty filtering out irrelevant information like bright lights or loud noises. And this can become painful and overwhelming and result in frequent meltdowns or behavioral challenges. So, and then some kids are sensory seekers. They need more of a certain type of sensory input. Where others are sensory avoiders and they'll do anything to avoid certain noises or stimulus. So once these things are brought into balance, then you find that these kids can tolerate more ups and downs of everyday life. They can focus better in class, and they're just calmer in general. And the wonderful thing is now there's this growing awareness that many of these same sensory activities that have been used to help kids find regulation can also be incredibly helpful in de-escalating those with trauma symptoms, because we all have these nervous systems. So this is where it all comes together, and this is where I get excited. When I am working with a trauma survivor, I can be more efficient and effective when I consider the sensory input, which might be helpful or harmful during the attempt of getting regulated. So it is not just for kids. Proprioception is considered heavy work. And so some ideas, I mean, you can find a ton of ideas and a ton of books on all of these topics, but when I'm working with somebody who is in sympathetic, I will offer them some weighted blankets to put on their lap. With kids, they might appreciate bouncing on a therapy ball. Sometimes they need to carry a heavy object or push and pull something to give their body that input that they're craving. From a vestibular sense, swinging and rocking or being on a hammock, for me, that's my number one favorite thing, is swinging on a hammock. It just gives such a sense of calm and relaxation. Some people want a twisting or spinning sensation, maybe hanging upside down or using a ball to bend backwards, bouncing on a trampoline, walking on a balance beam, or moving through an obstacle course. This is why playgrounds are so important for kids. And then interoception, the awareness of what's going on in our body, being able to feel your heartbeat, being aware of how you're breathing, how deep you're breathing, being aware of your hunger and thirst, and how every different emotion affects your body in a different way. And growing your awareness in that will make you more sharp in the world of interoception. Yoga Nidra is a type of yoga. This is a great activity to do before you fall asleep, where someone guides you in focusing on each and every little part of your body. And it really puts you in touch with what's going on inside your body. So this next slide is probably in the wrong spot, but nevertheless, we talked about neuroception and how our bodies pick up cues of safety and cues of danger with little tiny hints, little micro hints. So some examples of cues of safety that I might use with my clients are I can control my voice. I can control how intense it is, how soft it is, how harsh I come across. I can make my surroundings more predictable. I can control the lighting, and just being reassured, telling somebody, you know, it's really normal for people who've gone through what you've experienced to have these symptoms. And sometimes that is just the biggest relief for people, because they come in the doors thinking that they're broken and something's wrong with them. But to learn that these are normal symptoms for what they've gone through is kind of a relief. So that can be a sign of safety. Anything involving nature, water, wind, trees, rocks, leaves. And we can bring these things, depending on what they are, indoors. We can have a water fountain or the sound of a water fountain or a waterfall in our office. It's really important to take one thing at a time. And like I did with the kids that I would interview, parallel activities like coloring, And you want to think like in terms of having a cozy and warm and inviting environment. All those things cue your body and tell you it's okay. Everything's going to be okay. You're safe right here. Now, cues of danger are things like those bright fluorescent lights everywhere, loud and unexpected noises. There's certain types of music choices. Chaos, confusion, too much eye contact, like I said, can be very threatening, whether you are on the autism spectrum or you've been traumatized. It can just be too overwhelming. A lack of structure is never a good thing. Harsh smells, rough textures, being rushed, talking over other people, and even extremes in temperatures. I mean, I could go on and on. There are so many cues of safety and cues of danger in our environments that it's important to pay attention to. And speaking of cues of safety, I don't know if any of you have heard about a study that was done in 2019 with Leeds, University of Leeds, where they did this little experiment, and they found that by watching videos of animals or pictures of animals, blood pressure and heart rate came down. And there was 19 participants, and stress levels and then just an overall feeling of well-being can, kind of creep in, which is what we want. So it's no wonder that some of us scroll through Instagram looking for funny animal videos and pictures, because our nervous system loves that. So pulling everything together here, I'd like to do that by answering 3 questions. First of all, how can I maintain my own emotional regulation? And then what can I do to help other people regulate? And how can I introduce the concept of emotional safety to someone who has never even experienced that? It all boils down to safety. Deb Dana says, as a therapist, you are responsible for being a regulated and regulating presence for your clients. Without your predictable, ongoing offer of co-regulation in the therapy session, your clients will struggle to engage in the therapeutic process of change. So if you are unsympathetic, how is it that your client is going to become regulated if there's nobody there to help guide the way? The obvious, of course, is proper sleep, nutrition, and exercise, but there's so many things beyond that we can do. It's important that we all regularly engage in whatever social support network feels good to us. We've got to get in some regular play and opportunities to be creative. Get out of our head now and then and get into our body in whatever way you like to do that. Some ideas are massage, meditation, yoga. There's the float tanks in Boise. I think they're in Meridian too. I want to say this right, Qigong, and Tai Chi, or is it? I don't know. I may be getting it wrong. Journaling, different activities like this help you process and get out of your head. Another thing we like to do, if you know about EMDR, you know what bilateral stimulation is. And basically it's this back and forth, left and right movement. So when you're walking, the act of left, right, walking, that is bilateral stimulation. Sometimes we'll have people do a technique called the butterfly hug, where you tap your collarbone area back and forth, nice and slow. That can be very calming. But my favorite is this little device. It's a buzzer. It's a tactile stimulation device, and we use it in EMDR, and you can turn it up, and it can go really fast. But that is reserved for EMDR. If you do it really slowly, it can be incredibly relaxing. And so sometimes I'll have a client put some weighted blankets in their lap, and just as they're talking to me and describing what's going on, we'll put the buzzers in their hand, and just very slowly there'll be this back and forth buzzing. And the majority of clients really enjoy that and appreciate it and look forward to it. There's something about it that's very soothing. I don't know if it's the buzzing or the back and forth, but there's many ways to go about this. But those are just a few ideas. So if I see a client who's just told me a very traumatizing, horrific story, I need to take a minute and breathe and process what I just heard. So I might shut my office door and sit down with some weighted blankets, maybe do a little yoga, and turn on the buzzers for a few minutes and just do some deep breathing. And then I can re-regulate myself that way. So it's important to know what depletes you and what energizes you, and what kind of nervous system input fills you with pleasure and relaxation, and what kind of sensory input stresses you out, and what steps can you take to keep that away from you. So all really important things to consider. Another important thing here is, just like muscles, the state that you're in the most becomes the strongest. And so there's so many people who come into the office and they are really good at staying in sympathetic. They're always heightened and on guard and ready to fight. And so the more time you spend in ventral vagal, or your window of tolerance, the stronger it can become, and the more resilient you can become to the little ups and downs that might take some people down. So ask yourself, what nourishes my nervous system? And the sooner you start recognizing that and doing those things, the sooner you'll see the payoff for yourself and for the people you work with. And then the next question, how can I help regulate my clients? Remember, we looked at that slide that said cues of safety and cues of danger. Try to identify those and incorporate as many as you can. Think creatively. Look outside the box. What kind of things do people perceive as comforting, and what kind of things do they perceive as irritating or annoying? So start with your room, maybe your office. Make sure the lighting is good, and bring in some elements from nature. Maybe have a lot of fidget toys. We love fidget toys at Faces of Hope. Anytime somebody comes out with a new idea on the market, we get it. A lot of people, regardless of age, regardless of neurodiversity or trauma level, people love fidgets. So your tone of voice, the pace that you talk, your body language, your facial expressions. Be sure to normalize and validate what people are telling you. One of the fastest ways to upregulate and downregulate is breath work. So if I want more sympathetic energy, if I'm feeling really tired and I need to pick myself up, I'm going to make sure that my inhalations are longer than my exhalations. And then if I need to calm down, I'll do the opposite and make sure that my exhalations are longer than my inhalations. So breath and nature are two of the most powerful ways to help regulate yourself and others. Since stress tends to get stuck in our muscles and our bodies keep the score, as Dr. Bessel van der Kolk says, it's important to do stretches, learn some yoga poses. I also like to incorporate rocking and swinging. If you look online and look up vagus nerve exercises or vagus nerve hacks, you will find so many ideas. The vagus nerve goes through or near, I'm not sure if it's through or near the vocal cord. So it kind of branches off and goes behind the vocal cords, up by the ears and behind the eyes. So exercises like moving your eyes from left to right or up and down repeatedly and slowly can help you with regulation. I teach a class called Going to Court with Confidence, and a lot of times people have to go to court because of the crime that has been committed against them. And I will give them ideas for regulating in court without anybody knowing. And one of those things I tell people to try is ear massages. Maybe gently pulling your ear away. There's certain areas in your ear you can rub, and you might start to find yourself yawning or sighing, and that's a sign that it's working. We give out some little acupressure rings, and they feel really good to move up and down each finger, and you could bring that in court with you and nobody's really going to know that you are trying to regulate your nervous system. So I encourage all of you to look things up online for ideas. Allowing time for transitions is important. Being non-judgmental. There's just all sorts of things you can do to help your clients calm and relax. One other thing I wanted to mention real quick is there's a Danish term, some of you may have heard of it. It's called hygge, but it's spelled Hygge. And Denmark ranks among the happiest nations in the world. And I think that hygge has something to do with it here. It's a word it's hard to nail down the definition, but in essence, it means a lot of things. It means coziness, comfort, contentment, well-being, togetherness. It's a sensory experience. So when you think of a fireplace or candles or a hot cup of cocoa or baking bread, these things kind of instill the idea of hygge. And so that's an interesting concept to look into and see what you could do to bring into your own life to help others. Also, there is a sensation vocabulary. As counselors, we give people, a list of emotions to help them identify, because most people only know happy, sad, embarrassed, angry, mad, but the vocabulary for emotions goes way, 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 way beyond that. And so helping people learn what those words are so that they can identify what they're feeling and where they feel it in their body, how it's making their body feel. People don't have those words on the tip of their tongue, so providing that to them can be very helpful. And then how can I help people who have never had the privilege of being able to let their guard down? Well, you start where they're at. You build rapport, find out what's important to them. What are their hobbies? What are their goals? When are the times in their life that they have felt their best? And what was it that was making them feel their best? How can we bring that back on board and nourish it and feel it once again? It's baby steps. It's starting small, because a lot of people who are stuck in dorsal vagal, their sensations have been cut off. They are numb. And so they can't feel things that you normally could feel. And it's a very slow process to get that feeling back on. And our body does it to keep us safe. So it's not going to easily let go of that. But there's things you can do. There's steps you can take. Giving them the language of emotions and sensations, videos and handouts is a great idea. I have a video that I've been showing people. I would show it to you if we had more time, but you can easily find it on YouTube. It's about 9 minutes long, and it's called Trauma and the Nervous System, a Polyvagal Perspective, and it's produced by the Trauma Foundation. So if you get a chance to look at that, most of the people I show that to, it's like these light bulbs come on, like, oh, okay, this is my path to healing. This is what I need to do to get better and recoup. So the possibilities are endless, and I could talk for hours about it. But start with yourself. Start to be a detective and find out what brings you a sense of safety, what nourishes your nervous system. Use all 8 senses to find where that's at. And then you can find your own sense of peace and calm and safety and be more effective in what it is that you do. So I hope that was helpful for you. I tried to get a lot in. Do any of you have any questions or comments on this subject? Gonna pull up chat here. All right. Well, thank you for letting me come and talk about this subject today. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
It was very educational.
You're
Thank
very
you.
welcome. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.